Welcome back to The Heat as we bring you a special edition of our show on the road in New York. Here, a Chinese delegation has been talking China-U.S. trade issues with Americans at the Asia Society. Joining me now is Zhou Jingxing. He is Minister Counselor and Chief of the Political Section of the Chinese Embassy in the United States. Also with us, Stephen Orlins. He is President of the National Committee on United States-China Relations. Welcome to both of you to the show. Jingxing, let me start with you. The 100-day plan. Are you pleased with progress so far?
Well, we are pleased with what China and the United States have achieved so far in developing the bilateral relations and also the economic cooperation and trade. And the 100-day plan is just one part of it. It is a plan that is designed to give further impetus to this bilateral relationship, especially in the economic and trade area. So I think that with the early harvest that we have seen, we are going to make greater progress in the months ahead.
Right. Talking about progress, what are the biggest areas of progress that you've seen so far?
I think the most important progress that we have seen so far in bilateral economic and trade relationship is actually not in the specific areas, but actually in the perception of the two sides. And that is on the part of the United States, it has a further understanding that this bilateral relationship in economic and trade areas is really mutually beneficial, not only to China and the United States, but also to the whole world. And on the part of China, we also recognize that this is an important administration that we can do business with, and we want to move ahead.
There has been something of a focus, though, in the run-up to these talks on agriculture. U.S. beef exports to China, chicken exports from China to the United States. What kind of progress has there been there?
That is a very important progress, of course, in itself, and that is because we understand that the previous administration of the United States and the current one have shown great interest in exporting the U.S. beef to China, while there is a huge market in China as well. And also on the part of China, we also try to export our poultry to this country. So I think that after years of discussions and after going through all of the procedures needed to clear customs, and I think that it is a very good sign that we can really do business in that area.
Right. Steve, there has been a push on the part of both countries for greater access to each other's markets, for more fairness in trade. Do you see that happening?
I think Jingxing's comment that it's been an improvement in perception is correct, that there has been an improvement in perception, but there has not been major market access opening. And that we're going to wait to the end of the 100 days when they convene the comprehensive economic dialogue to see precisely what the progress is. We've seen an opening to the credit rating agencies of the United States to be able to establish businesses in China, rate Chinese credits, which is good for the United States and I would argue very good for China. It's something which should have been done and is now being done. So the question is, what are we going to see? This early harvest has been, again, it's a positive. All of these things are a positive, but the jury is out as to whether we're going to see major successes in market opening.
China and the United States are two large economies, and we also have such diversities in our economic structure. So I think it takes quite a little while, more than 100 days, to solve any issue. So it is very important for us to really have a true understanding and a vision for this bilateral relationship and move ahead in that direction. So 100 days is very important, but I think it takes a little while for us to settle all of the issue. Maybe we will not be able to settle all of the issue. It is going to be a long, long process. But in the whole process, we are going to make progress.
But Jingxing, I would say, by the way, that we say it's a long process. This is not a new process. These discussions are not new. That these issues have been there for many, many years. They've been discussed many times. And the question is, does the U.S. government on its side want to resolve some of these? And does the Chinese government on its side want to resolve these? Do they have the political will to engage in the market openings that are basically good for the people on both sides of the Pacific?
Jingxing, a lot has been made about the U.S. trade deficit with China, currently around $347 billion. That was last year. President Trump has made a lot of comments on that as well. Can that be resolved, or could it undermine the trading relationship between China and the United States?
Well, trade deficit has been a very complicated issue. And I think that both China and the United States recognize the importance and significance of this of this issue to the overall business ties and also the bilateral relationship politically. So I think that we are taking steps to settle, to try to narrow the trade deficit between the two countries. But the important question is, how are we going to perceive this? And people are talking about the fairness or unfairness. Being fair or unfair is a matter of subjective perception, but being balanced or unbalanced, and that is a matter of objective fact. So I think that we should really take a look at the real picture of the imbalanced trade and see where we can do and what measures that we can take in the next step to improve this bilateral relationship. And I think 100-day plan is very important in that it is a positive sign to show that both sides have the political will and also the political capability to move ahead toward each other to settle their differences in rational and appropriate ways.
Overly focusing on the bilateral trade deficit is a mistake. Bilateral trade deficits, you know, we don't have time in this program, but are caused substantially by savings deficits. So the United States doesn't save them much. We need to import capital and goods in order to make up for the savings deficit, and that's really a major cause of our bilateral trade deficit with China. You also have China, and it's not recognized widely in the United States. China has vastly improved the most important metric of trade deficits, which is current account deficit as a percentage of GDP. So if we were talking 10 years ago, that number would be 8%, and the World Bank, IMF would say that is bad. You really shouldn't have it that high. Today, it's down to roughly 2%, depending on the year. So we've seen an enormous improvement in China's trading position, which is not generally recognized in the United States. Also, what's happened, again, which Americans don't tend to understand, is our trade deficit with China is the old trade deficit we used to have with Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Hong Kong. What happens is the goods start to be produced there, gets sent into China, and gets exported back to the United States, and the entire value gets put against our trade deficit, which really, in truth, doesn't make a ton of sense.
If we look at exports from the United States to China, it's been growing over the last decade,
much faster than
10 and 11%
yes,
year on
much
year.
Faster than our exports.
So that would point to a closing of that gap, wouldn't it?
It would, well, except China's exports have been growing even as a percentage because they have a much higher base, growing more slowly than U.S. exports to China, but because it's a much higher base, the total value of Chinese exports to the United States are growing faster than U.S. exports to China.
Right. Jingxing, you know, we talk about the 100-day plan. If we look at the longer term, what are the prospects for a bilateral investment deal between these two countries?
Well, I think China and the United States have invested a lot of efforts and also time and energy into negotiating the bilateral investment treaty. And we have made tremendous progress, and we already have a framework, and we have also hammered out some of the details of the BIT. And I think that this is really something that we should value. And there are a lot of people in the United States government that are paying attention to the BIT deal. And I think it is very important for the two sides to sit down together again and to complete this deal. Because bilateral investment treaty is going to bring jobs to the United States, and it is also going to help reduce the deficit between China and the United States.
Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
I think investment is so critical that the flows of investment from, you know, formerly used to be from the U.S. to China. Now it's substantially more. Last year we saw $46 billion from China invested in the United States. We're going to see roughly that amount. This year it's grown very rapidly. We now have 141,000 Americans on Chinese payrolls in the United States. And as Jingxing said, that it's job creating or job preserving. We've seen some greenfields investment, you know, Fuyao Glass in Dayton, Ohio, you know, and others throughout the United States, which truly are job creating. But we also see when Chinese buy U.S. companies, they preserve the jobs and they expand the jobs, that they bring in new capital, which leads to job expansion. So a bilateral investment treaty will take the $46 billion and grow it hopefully to $100 billion and give President Trump the opportunity to say, I have created more jobs in the United States. Right. And as importantly, it will allow the United States U.S. companies to invest in sectors in China that they have historically not been able to invest. And when U.S. companies can invest in China, that actually it results in more exports from the United States to China. So it's really a classic win-win, and I really hope the Trump administration can move forward to concluding that.
All right, Steve, one quick question before we end, and that is, we talk about the trade and economic relationship between the United States and China, but how important is that relationship for the rest of the world's economy?
If it were disrupted, it would be horrendous for the entire world. That disruption in the U.S.-China relationship, either the economic or the strategic relationship, would send waves, shock waves out from China and the United States to the rest of the world and be disruptive to world trade and to peace and stability in the entire world. So my answer relates to both economic and strategic relationship.
Jingxing, that meeting that took place between President Xi and President Trump in Florida, many saw that as a positive step in building and strengthening the relationship between China and the United States. How much of a turning point was that in improving this relationship?
If you take a look at the campaign area, and then you look at the meeting at the Mar-a-Lago against that background, and then you see how important and what important progress that we have made in Mar-a-Lago. And I think both presidents have hit it off. There was this kind of chemistry between the two presidents. They also set the tone for this bilateral relationship, and they also worked out the blueprint for China-U.S. relations in the years ahead. So I think that as long as we have the strategic guidance from the two leaders, then the bilateral relationship will move ahead, while at the same time we should also be focused on those differences. But we should always bear in mind that when we address those differences, we must not be obsessed with them. We must ensure that their settlement and our approach to address those differences will be helpful for the overall bilateral relations.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for joining us. That's it for this special edition of The Heat. Thanks for joining us from News.